Welcome. My name's Matt Hall and I'm the Director of Marketing Admissions at the Australian International School. Just before we get started, I'd just like to do some administration tasks, just to remind people to have their microphone turned off. It just helps with our sound quality. This is going to be an interactive session, and what I mean by that is at the end, you'll be able to ask questions to Brady. You'll be able to put them in the comment box. And I'll better read them back to him and he'll better answer those. But we will wait to the end just so that we can get through some of the ideas and conversation points that he has already thought about that we thought you would most like to listen to. So thank you very much for that. The recording will be recorded so that we can play that back to our guests who have missed this afternoon, and they can watch at their own leisure, or yourselves to share with family or friends that you think might be interested after this. So thank you to all our guests who are joining us here today for the first of our 2021 webinar series, Into the Classroom, where we celebrate the amazing work of the range of educators from across our 3 sub-schools. Our very first guest this year is the very talented Dr. Brady Klein, the Head of Digital Learning at AIS. Brady has a PhD in Educational Leadership, has had an intriguing career where he's gone from a hotshot industry expert to a wonderful teaching career spanning across the globe. So without further ado, welcome along, Brady.
Thank you very much, Matt. It's great to be here with you.
Just before we get started, can you give us a background prior to coming to AIS?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. As you highlighted in the intro, I have kind of been a globe trotter of sorts, and I think probably it's just worth starting at the beginning. Back in the 90s, was .com era, and I was fresh out of university and dumped into a great role leading a team of programmers and all that stuff, and driving a sports car and everything. But I decided to have a midlife crisis and thought, you know what, I don't know if I want to do this. I have a friend that teaches in Honduras at this tiny little school, and he's told me to come down and teach 6th grade with him. So I said, why not? I'll give it a go. Just on a lark, I went down there, had no idea what I was doing, but I fell in love with teaching, and decided to go back to the United States, where I'm from, to get a master's degree. And then I headed on to China, Germany, Romania, been to Thailand, Japan, and Singapore. And so in a variety of different positions.
That's really interesting. Now, at our school, your title is Head of Digital Learning. Can you just explain to the audience what that actually means?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's been interesting over the last, let's say, about 2 decades or so, as technologies started to come into schools more and more. And at the beginning, the way they came in was through some, rather what I would say traditional IT kind of framework of we have to hire somebody who has a degree in information technology and knows how to install servers and set up Wi-Fi, and that person it fell to them to help with the teachers. But in the last decade, schools such as AIS have realized that that really doesn't quite match with the educational needs of the children, and doesn't really link the students, the teachers, and the technology as the center. So schools are investing in having someone who has a background in education that also happens to be really strong with technology to try to provide some leadership in that area. So in my role, I work with the IT team a little bit, but I'm really more on the educational leadership team and work across the 3 schools to provide strategy to the leadership team, as well as a lot of coaching and planning with the middle leadership.
And I think that's what's really important, and I'm pleased that you just touched on that point, is we are a large school, and there's some real advantages from being a school of what I call school of scale, which is school of size, is that we can have someone like an expert like you who can work across our 3 schools to ensure that we've got great continuity, but also with your amazing experience and foresight. And I've got to say, I had the real luxury, Brady, of working with you when we were looking at last year pivoting our school to online learning And obviously there's huge implications for the head of digital learning when we go to do this. But from that whole experience, and I'm sure me and you could talk for all day about that experience, but what would be two post-online learning, what were two takeaways that you would have taken away from that learning that we can carry on applying to the classroom or learning in general?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Matt. And there's probably 20 takeaways that are super important for schools. And I hope they're ones that we can hold on to and don't lose sight of. But two that really come to mind for me. Number one is, in this world that we live in, where every single one of us is using devices all day long, the idea of having technology be part of education is no longer optional. It's not something that we can really ignore. And I think that at AIS, I've really seen this growth, not just since then, but even before, which really made us well placed to move into that home-based learning, because every teacher was using technology and we had some systems in place. Of course, as you can imagine, some teachers would use technology more than others. Maybe a literature teacher would be using technology in some different ways than an art teacher. But everybody understood that that computers and technology, iPads, are so great, not just for doing the art or typing your next famous novel, but also for the collaborative structures and workflows that you can do with a teacher, both face-to-face and also distance learning. So that's the first thing, that using technology is not optional, and we have to have staff and teachers that are confident with that, and we do. The second thing is just the human element. I've all seen this, that no matter how much we love technology, and I do, I'm a zealot, there still is that personal element, and we have to find ways to connect personally. And so one of the things that we really learned right away with our home-based learning was that giving students work to do, sending things on Google Classroom or on Seesaw was great, but the real huge value, the part that was really important, was when we got onto our video chat with the students every day. And sometimes that was to go over curricular things, but also was just to be humans and have that connection. And the students really loved it, and it really provided a lot of meaning to the teachers as well. So that's something that I hope that we don't learn, no matter how online we get and how much technology we use, that we don't lose sight of that personal human connection.
That's really interesting. I think for me, just like you, it made us remember the value of being face-to-face. And what was so beautiful is the art of teaching is being there involved with the children. So while we can see we pivoted well as a school, we also realized that the sheer beauty of being face-to-face is so important for the children and learning. A real focus of this series so far has been around bringing the curriculum alive and talking about what we're actually doing in school. And with that in mind, you and I have had a conversation. Can we just go back to elementary school, and let's just look at technology in the elementary at the moment at AIS. Is there anything exciting, or what's the next step? What are you looking at the moment?
Yeah, great question. Really exciting. I've spent part of my career as a secondary teacher and also a lot of my career as an elementary teacher. And there's just really nothing better than seeing children who become really fluent with technology, so that they're not sitting waiting to be told what to do, but they know how to pick up a device and figure out the next thing. And in some ways, I think we've probably seen this. If you have children, you've seen that sometimes the children can learn it quickly than the adults. And so sometimes they can be the leader in the class, and I really love seeing that when we have a lot of teachers that are really comfortable giving the students an authentic opportunity to really learn and explore on their own. And what that means sometimes is that as teachers, we have to rethink how we plan our lessons in a way that really provides authentic choice for the students. And in the elementary, we're a primary years program, part of the International Baccalaureate. And this PYP program has a real renewed focus just in the last year on providing students the opportunity to have really co-construct the learning experience with the teacher. And so in technology, that often means that we're providing opportunities for students to do something with technology that we haven't really quite imagined. And that might be taking 2 or 3 skills they have with technology and mashing them up in a way that we really weren't ready for. And maybe it's something that they learned in another class and the teacher doesn't even know about that. I think I have a slide or two I'd like to show you. We can just hold on a second. I'll find it. Yeah. So this is a young lady in year 3, and she's got her iPad there, and I don't know if you can see this, but that is a website that she built, and this is an example where this particular classroom teacher was new to AIS, and she wasn't familiar with how to make a website on an iPad, but this girl was, because in year 2 she had learned how to do it. And this teacher was a brave enough teacher that gave the students choice in how they wanted to express and share their knowledge. And this child said, hey, I want to make a website. I know how to do it. I've got these tools, I've got these things, and I can put it together. And she did just that. But the student right next to her had a different idea. He wanted to make a video. And again, this was not something the teacher said, we're all going to learn how to make videos. That's fine, but when you see students really make that application on their own, this student knew how to do green screen. He went and checked out the green screen on his own, and set this up and created this all on his own. So it's really fascinating.
And it's really interesting that you bring up this point. In the past, I've worked in education too, like yourself, from elementary up to secondary school, and I've watched the unfolding of technology in the classroom. And you are spot on. To begin with, when we were introducing technology, that's exactly what we did. We spent whole lessons teaching on how to use the website, make a website. So, we deliberately, whole class spent a whole term on how to make a website. Whereas now the technology is just our vehicle to communicate their literacy, right? And that's the beautiful thing. Like you just said then, they're using 2 different methods. The teacher didn't prescribe. They didn't waste a whole lesson on learning how to do green screen or learning how to do websites. It was just choose the best way to communicate your ideas. And that's what we all in the adult world use technology for, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's so exciting to watch them, and the teachers too, because the teachers have to learn. Just think about how quickly the pace of technology is going. The teachers are always on the cutting edge of learning the next thing. Sometimes they're just a few steps ahead of the students because it's just the brand newest thing. But this model I'm showing you here, we call it the SAMR model. It's just a way of thinking about how we use technology, not just at school, but primarily in educational context. This idea that we can use technology just to substitute for what we've already done. So I was writing it with a pen and paper, and now I'm writing it on a computer. And then you can move up the scale from augmentation to modifications to the lessons, to the point of the R, which is a redefinition where what you're seeing is something that you couldn't even have imagined without the technology. And so there's good times to use the substitution, but we're always striving to move up that ladder where possible.
That's really interesting. So with this in mind, and this is perhaps going to, you have to discuss where it fits into this model, but I know that you were looking at a new maths program in the elementary school, which I found really fascinating because I come from a maths background. So I thought it just was a wonderful use of technology and perhaps the future of where we might see more engagement of technology in the classroom. Can you share with the audience about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. Some parents have seen their children working on little math programs on iPads, and they're great, and they've been great for years. They're a really great supplement to an existing curriculum. But this newest generation of tools really does adaptive learning, and you could say it's AI or machine learning, but the key point is that it's adaptive. So it knows what the student already knows and knows what the next step is. And so this is, I guess it's a bit of the holy grail in education, because it's been known for decades that the results between private one-on-one tutoring and a typical traditional lecture are 2 sigma, 2 standard deviations difference of performance for students. So, schools have been looking for ways to kind of close those gaps, and some moves towards mastery learning have helped, but platforms such as the one we've just invested in, called Freckle, really ups that, because they take a little pretest in maths, and then the very next thing you know, you have every student has their own personalized learning pathway. And it links to what the teacher is teaching, but when it's time for the student to have practice on the concept, if some students have some prerequisite missing knowledge, the program knows that and will give that first. So everyone's getting exactly what they need. No one has to be bored. No one has to be crying because it's too hard. So it's a really amazing transformation in what we can do in the class to know that we're really hitting the right pace for every single student. And this is the great case of there's some things that teachers can do better than a computer and always will be able to. And there's some things that technology actually can maybe do better. And identifying the perfect learning pathway for each student, especially in something like maths, it's really powerful at. And that frees up some time for the teacher to be having those personal connections and grabbing the student that needs the extra help and helping them one-on-one, because they know exactly where that student is.
So just correct me if I'm wrong here. So the program's called Freckle. It's going to be rolled out for all of elementary. Is that correct?
Yes. In fact, I was in sessions with teachers almost all day today, working from year 1 through 5, and we're going to be looking at using it more in year 6 and 7 and 8 as well moving forward. So I'll just note that a really simple example that I think all of us could wrap our head around is reading. You can imagine in any classroom, there's going to be a difference in reading levels between different students, but you're doing let's say a history lesson on a particular event that has happened, and you want every student to be able to read an article. What Freckle lets us do in its reading section is find that topic, assign it to the students, and it automatically gives a different version of the same article at the different reading levels. So if we have an EAL student, for example, they may be reading 3 or 4 year levels below the top readers. And so they get something that's appropriate for them, and so they can access the material and continue growing. And at the same time, the real champion reader, who is 3 years ahead of most students, is getting something that is really challenging with advanced vocabulary. So it's really transformational.
Goodness, is it ever? I've read some interesting research around this, and parents will find this quite interesting. Is what they found. There's a Professor Graham Nuttall that did a lot of research around students and learning and where they pick up their curriculum. And what he found out actually was that 50% of what students were taught, they already knew. Now that's a little bit frightening. So what I'm saying by that is, say we had a maths lesson, and today we are doing area. The teacher will start area. What they've found out in the past is actually half the class knew area. Half the class already knew area, already knew. The teacher teaches to that, so the other half do catch up. Now this is where programs like Freckle can come along, as we can know exactly where all the kids are. Now, really, really good teachers do break them into 3 or 4 groups in the classroom, so that's even better. So you can imagine now, so they've got some perhaps going out with 3-dimensional volume, some will be doing area, and then maybe a lower group might just be doing perimeter, right? So you can see that's nice. Now, Freckle goes even further than that. Right? So now you've got those different levels broken down into 10 more times. And there's no way that a teacher could do each child, what's your next step? Matt Hall, myself, he's just doing perimeter, and now he's about to step on. So this is going to be a game changer for teaching. I see huge potential. So you're saying maths, and then you're also saying reading comprehension reading as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So we are using it for maths and reading, and we also have it. We're using it a little bit for some of our spelling stuff, because it does some real dynamic spelling activities, and especially for the younger years, where they can do word sorts, so they have patterns that they can drag over and listen to the word and then drag where it belongs, and which is very, very similar to the Words Their Way program that we are actually already implementing. So it aligns pedagogically with what we're doing, which is really great when you have that, because sometimes you get a resource that's a great kind of a one-off parallel thing, but you don't really feel like it belongs with your curriculum. So this is a perfect match, and so we're finding ways for the teachers to really use the data in Freckle to inform how they do their lessons, rather than just assigning it as a side project.
This is phenomenal. And like we said at the very start, we're never going to be able to replace the real teacher with the student, because and we've learned that from our online learning. It was nice, and that we could fill the gap, but the very best options being there. Now, what Freckle is doing is now it's freeing the teacher up to be doing that smaller one-on-one groups, using the actual maths materials like the rulers or laying it out, and that one-to-one or smaller group teaching, while the other students are working at their exact right pace, right? You're working at their correct pace. And where I see this huge is, a lot of gifted students, for example, they've learnt at twice the rate as other students, and they are often very difficult for a classroom teacher to get the appropriate work for them because they move so quickly. Right? And that's the point of being gifted or identified as gifted. So I imagine with this, it's going to be moving students at exactly their pace, and it could be, the results could be quite enormous, couldn't it? Over a year or over 3 years, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's just one other element of it that I think I should really stress too, is that we had this debate in elementary when we were thinking about, because the primary years program is supposed to be an inquiry-based program where students have some choice in how they interact with the materials, and we want to have a lot of activities for them to explore ideas in kind of open-ended ways. I think there was some concern that, then is it kind of like they're just doing worksheets on a computer? And the really amazing thing is that's not at all what it is. We talk a lot about in education about agency, students being able to exercise their own kind of free will, if you will, and how they control their environment and control their learning. And a program like Freckle does exactly that. So instead of having learning happening to you and then the teacher moves on to the next unit, whether you learned it or not, the student can see all of the learning outcomes. They can see what they've mastered and what they haven't. And I found when I was working with a class last year, once I showed them that dashboard, that they could see their outcomes and they could go, oh, that's 70% mastered, that's 100% mastered. Their motivation skyrocketed because they said, Mr. Klein, can I have some extra time? This one's only 70% mastered. I'd like to go back and revise that. So they suddenly had this ownership of their learning, which was just a total game changer.
That's enormous, and you're dead right. It's so good to hear about that. The students be engaged in their own learning, knowing their next step, because they're more than capable of doing this. And like you said, if we can enhance their motivation and keep them engaged all the time, instead of, like we just said before, the research showed only 50% of the time, right? That was a good teacher. Let's be honest about that. It's what the research shows. And you could have them engaged over several years. This could be quite huge. Now, this is very exciting for the elementary. Can we move on to the secondary school? Because I think I know for one, and it's not just the secondary, but you can talk me a little bit more about it. The secondary is known as a Google school. It uses the Google Suites. Can you just talk, what does that mean to me? How does that help teaching and learning, and how are we implying this and moving?
Yeah, great question. Every teacher in the whole school, secondary, elementary, uses a huge suite of programs, and a lot of those programs are ones that we kind of define and provide for them, and then there's additional ones that they find on their own and they have a special affinity for, just like in real life. I think everybody who has a job knows how that works. But one of our core platforms we use is Google for Education, and you may be familiar with Google as a search engine, but they also have some really, really amazing cloud-based collaborative products. And the core suite of those is, if you will, it's a Microsoft Office kind of products with like Word and PowerPoint and Excel, but all in the cloud. And what's really powerful about that is it allows for instant, seamless collaboration. And what Google Classroom is one of these products that brings that together. So if I'm a teacher that's using Google Classroom, if I want to assign something to some students and I want them to follow this template that I've created, before I might have made that in Microsoft Word and might have tried to email it to my students, or I printed it out and handed it to them. But now with Google Classroom, I can make it in Google Docs. I press assign, and it automatically makes a copy for every single student, automatically puts their name on it, and it becomes the students. It's in the students' files, but it's also shared back to me as a teacher. And I can see live updates. I can see if I have multiple people working on one document, I can see there's 3 or 4 students. If I want to, I can even use a time machine feature to have it go back in time and play back. And I can see analytics on how much which students worked on which parts. And so it's really gives you just this insight into the work that the students is doing. Imagine it's like being able to look over a student's shoulder as they're working in their notebook, but they're at home doing their homework, but you still are able to see their work. And so it provides just this kind of one stop to be able to bring all of those things together. And it's really a real change from previous learning management systems from the past, which were really kind of based on courseware for universities. So if some of you have taken an online course in a university, these are these clunky systems that are really hard to manage the curriculum on, and it's not very interactive for the students. So what I really love about Google Classroom is we want our teachers to be responsive and having a dynamic classroom that's responding to the changing needs of the students. So instead of having them build out, here's the course for the year, get to it students, this is more like just-in-time ability to, in a few seconds, to reach over to Google Classroom, change something, send it over to the students, have them respond, because it has like live Q&A and all these kinds of things as well. So it's quite powerful. And also just on the logistics side, it allows us to collect resources and send them back. So no more of sending emails and these things. I have a slide of Google Classroom here somewhere, which I can hopefully I can find. That's not it. That's some great art though from a student. Yeah. So here's a Google Classroom post, and the reason I think this is interesting because Google Classroom lets the students bring all these different things from different applications and publish them all and share them all back to their teacher. But what I actually kind of like about this assignment is that you can see that it's asking the students not just to fill out a worksheet and upload it, but to do a whole bunch of different skills that they've learned over the course of a long time and apply them into a new and novel situation, transfer those skills here. And if you can read that, it's starting off with their handwriting notes, just like we would want someone to maybe draft, and then they're typing them. Then they're sharing that Google document with a friend, and that friend is then providing comments and suggesting edits, which then the student can respond to. These are things that we do as adults. And then they're taking that and they are publishing it onto a website, kind of like the one that we're using. So they can do all of that through here, and Google Classroom is that one central point where they can upload all their stuff and the teacher can see their progress and intervene when necessary or add comments.
I think you touched on so many points that I could jump in and talk about here. I think what was fabulous there, I'm sure the parents are happy to hear this, and I am too, is that there is still a massive component of handwriting, right? Penmanship, right? The students need to learn to write, and the very straightforward reason for this is for our parents and people joining us is our exams are still formally done in written form. Now, it does surprise me that we haven't caught up, to be honest with you. I think that would be a next move. But the reality is currently our formal exams in years 9, 10, and 11 and 12 are handwritten, right? And we all know that we need our penmanship. So that's still a big focus of our secondary school, which I think is fabulous. Students are still doing the written one. The second part that I want to jump on there, now, the enormity of what Google Classroom has done for the actual process of teaching and learning is enormous. And there's a piece of research that a Professor John Hattie did, which was around looking at the effect size of different influences on teaching and learning. And what he did was he looked through all the different things that made the most difference to teaching and learning for a child, right? So what had the highest outcome? And it still sticks in my head from this research that feedback and instantaneous and quick feedback, and what we mean by that is teacher or another student looking at a piece of work and being able to comment, was one of the biggest influences in student learning. So, and Google Classroom must offer so much to teachers. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. I'm just old enough to remember having a little inbox tray on the side of my desk when I started teaching, and the kids would put the paper on there, and throughout the day, maybe they put in 3 or 4 things, and then I went home with this giant stack, and maybe I didn't get to all of it right away, and they had to wait a day or two to get it back. And uh, and then maybe the feedback, we'd already kind of moved on, and it really wasn't, they couldn't really apply my feedback so much. So that's really a huge game changer for me to be able to see a dashboard on Google Classroom and see small thumbnails of every student's work and be able to click into it and see where they are at that moment and add a comment or maybe even make a suggestion onto their document, which they could approve or they could comment back to me, and we get in a little side chat. That could even be in the classroom. Sometimes that's still the most effective way, is to in the classroom make that comment instead of trying to run around and peek over 20 children's shoulders to be able to do it just from the computer. But certainly in the evening or in a free period to be able to do that so that they don't have to sit around and wait for a day or 2 or 3 days for feedback. It's a total game changer.
And I think, like, absolutely, I love the way you said the poking around, looking over their shoulder, because I often found that was a massive interruption to their learning, right? They're deep in their little thought, so the teacher interjecting over their shoulder would actually, step things backwards a couple of steps. So you're quite right, if you're able to sit there and give that feedback. And another part of this, and another thing that I've read, is students learn significantly from each other. I think there's even it was about 20 or 30% from each other. So the collaboration with each other is just, the potential here is awesome too, isn't it? It's not like them having to go and swap them, or even, they could both be at home at night doing homework, and that collaboration can be real time.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge change, and it can even be collaboration across from different class sections. Sometimes you have a reason why you might want some students would have a similar interest to be able to collaborate with students that aren't actually in the same class, and that can be really powerful. There's one other element of using something like Google Classroom that I think is really important, is we're not using some crusty old educational software that was developed in the 90s that the students hate. And being relevant to our students is so incredibly important. We want them to be engaged, and technology is a hugely important part of their lives, more important than we probably can even understand. So we want to make sure that we're relevant, using tools that they find attractive and that are actually the same kinds of tools that they use in their regular life. So our secondary students, they live on social media. And so when we use a tool like Google Classroom and Google Docs that reflects a lot of the same kinds of modes of communication that they're familiar with, then we're really speaking to them where they live.
And you've touched on something there, perfect too. It's relevant to the real world. We all know that cloud learning, cloud use is huge. And as teachers, educators, adults, how amazing has it been to have a one-place document that we can all go and move to work on? And even today was an example. We were filling out a table, it was student numbers in the school, right? Now, in the past, we would have handed this around 3 different people. Right? I would have passed it to you. You would have then passed it back to me. I would have updated it. Just the speed of us now, one central location, hopping in there, making adjustments, doing what we need to do real time. The students will see that. They'll be using it in the same way when they're doing a lot of collaborative work, because a huge amount of the IB program in year 11, 12 is about collaboration and working together on things. So this makes that process, like you said, one, they're seeing the adults real time. This is a skill set that's going on forever. 2, it's speeding up the whole process, which I think is phenomenal. What was amazing for us, and I think that we can jump onto this, is when we did move to online, when we had to leave, we had to shut down the school for a temporary amount of time last year. The reason we could pivot so quickly in the secondary school, and it really was remarkable that we were already set up as a Google Classroom, was that they already had these systems set up, correct? So can you talk us through how that helped us in that situation, and why that was so valuable?
Yeah. I think if we could take a look at secondary and elementary, they're both kind of interesting in their own unique way. But starting with secondary, because they use Google Classroom as the mechanism for just turning in the work and seeing what's due, then nothing had to change. Nothing at all. And the only thing that we added was the live video component, and that's integrated into Google Classroom too. So the students go to Google Classroom, there's a link at the top that says join the live class. They click on it, they're in. And what was interesting was secondary, how going back to my comment about that human interaction, secondary went to doing more and more of that. And it was interesting to see the growth of what worked and what didn't with large groups, small groups, and how the teachers adapted to those kind of scenarios. I think the other thing, like in elementary, is we use this platform called Seesaw. Upper elementary also uses Google Classroom, but Seesaw is a great platform to make it really easy for students to share their learning both with their teachers. And because our parents have the same Seesaw app and they get push notifications of my student just submitted this thing and the parent gave this feedback, that's really a great way to curate all the best work that the students are doing. We usually don't use it for everything, but during home-based learning, all we had to do was kind of scale that up and say, instead of only posting your favorite piece of the week, let's post 1 or 2 pieces a day. And this is also really great for the parents because whether the children are at school or they're in the bedroom next door because it's home-based learning and everyone's at home, parents rightly wonder, how's my kid doing? How do they fit in? Does the teacher know them? And so being able to have this little thing just pop up on their phone and wonderfully not in their email inbox, because it's just great to not be in your inbox as much as possible. Have it pop up and see, oh, my daughter just posted this little screencast of herself recording this thing. And the teacher responded, not with a stuffy typed message, but with an audio recording saying, wow, that was really amazing. I really liked how you did this and you really improved this. And maybe your next step might be this. And that just little extra personal touch really went a long way.
You've touched on something really interesting there, because like we've talked about so far, that digital learning covers so much in our school. One, it's how it can actually aid with the teaching and learning process through Freckle. One, we're seeing Google, it's allowing us to collaborate, but also it's helping us facilitate learning in a far cleverer way with passing things around, and it meant that we could pivot. Third way, you're seeing that it's bringing teaching and learning from home to school in a far more beautiful way for that sincere, and parents can actually be more engaged in the learning process and see exact pieces of work straight away. And when I go back to some of the learnings that we took away from our when school was closed for a little while, we were forced to do parent-teacher interviews online. Can you talk us through the process of what some of our learnings were and how that benefited the whole process?
Well, it's funny, it's a crisis. We can't have the parents here, and it's going to be a big challenge for us logistically. And will the parents accept this? Well, the feedback was so great that dads didn't have to take the day off, or moms, to come into school, and that they had some flexibility with how they could do it. And we have a parent conferences coming up in a few weeks, and we're doing them online again, partially because of safe distancing measures, but also partly because the feedback was really great. The parents really appreciated that. So it's an interesting learning for us. And I am definitely 100% looking forward to us being able to have face-to-face meetings again. But it's also nice to know that as a whole community, we have some more efficient ways to communicate. That if a parent wants to have a real good conversation that's a little bit better than just on the telephone with a teacher, it can be arranged and they can have it up and running in just a minute or two.
And I think that's really important. I think you've touched on a couple of things again that I'd love to reiterate. Was one, it meant that both parents could attend, which is work hours. It could mean, especially I think when we open up and perhaps parents are traveling more, the traveling parent can engage and be part of that education, and they found that beautifully wonderful. There was what I've found when we talked about it, there was a nice calmness to it, because if anyone has been to our secondary school, perhaps I can, as one example, when we have our parent-teacher interviews, you can imagine logistically, we've got 1,200 students and they've got 6 or 7 teachers each. There is no easy way for a school to do that. What we do is we do it in our big gym, and we have the teachers and we move them around. They've got 5 minutes, and some people have joked it's a little bit like speed dating, right? And we understand that, trust us. It's not what we would like to do ideally, but we are restrained by logistics. What this meant was a far easier system of the parents quite relaxed at home. They're not having to try and find, where's Mr. Hall, where's Mr. Klein, who's that? They're all furiously looking at pictures, and kids are all looking anxious and nervous that they're going to talk to which parent. How beautiful is it that the parents can be relaxed at home, or perhaps one in the office? It's a far nicer environment for us to be able to do it. There was less walking around, wasting time. So it was a win-win. Like you say, I don't think as a school that we would perhaps go back to that. And that's another nice way we use technology to improve the process. And it's not necessarily teaching and learning, but it might be school-parent relationships.
And if this pandemic had happened 5-6 years ago, that might have been a bigger challenge. But we live in a tech ubiquitous society where almost every adult is pretty comfortable with some kind of Skype or Microsoft Teams or Google Meet. And because we had invested in building up our use of this Google suite of tools, which included a video conferencing thing that most of our staff had already engaged with considerably before we ended up closing. So it's really great that we weren't caught off guard too badly, because we were ready.
Absolutely. You did right. 5 years. It's amazing how that technology came along, and our school was already a one-to-one laptop school in our secondary school. Our elementary students were already up and using iPads. So we were incredibly well equipped to pivot, which I'm very proud of the way that we did it. I'd just like to now, let's just go back and have a moment for yourself. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Just out of personal interest, can you tell me a bit more? You've earned the right to be called doctor, and I often talk to educationists where they're very humble around this, right? And they almost insist on not calling it. And I go the opposite way. I insist on putting the title there, because people have worked very hard for this. Can you talk through your doctorate? Like, how did you? What was it about? Tell the audience, because it's interesting.
Oh, thank you, Matt. Yeah, being called doctor is a little bit odd. I'm still getting used to it. I think my rule of thumb is if they asked for doctor on the airplane, would I click the call button or not? So I wouldn't. But thank you for your kind words. My dissertation, my study was really around the way that different leaders interact with each other, and which is a common focus of educational leadership studies. But mine was really focused on the relationship between the principal and their associate or vice principal, and how important that relationship is in developing the subordinate, the vice or associate principal, because almost invariably that person is being groomed or is wanting to become a principal, and just how challenging that relationship can be, because honestly the assistant role is a really challenging task, and it has been known in the research to be one of the hardest jobs in education. So my studies looked at how building up self-efficacy in subordinates can influence their performance. So there's a lot of technical stuff in there, but yeah, it's pretty interesting to see that the results really did show how important the interaction between self-efficacy and the human relationship of those two individuals was.
Oh, I think that we could talk all day about that, and I like the the recognition there that basically that deputy role it is one of the. I laughed at when you said that. Having had that role, it did feel like that too. At the time, you get an incredible workload. And I always go back to it. I think that people should be, I know, very humble, but absolutely still a doctor. It's wonderful for our students to talk about this. We've got lots of doctors across our school at different roles, which is quite nice for the students to understand how that's come about. I think just with time in mind now, Brady, what I will do is I'll open it out to our guests. If they've got questions that they'd like to ask, if there's anything they want a little bit more in depth in, please feel free to type. Or you could turn your microphone on and you can actually just ask that question outright, because I'm sure a lot of you have got something you'd like to ask Brady. So feel free to our audience to type in or to jump on the side. I'll give people a little bit of a minute. One big thing that I think that does come out there, Brady, I know there's a lot of parents probably watching, how much screen time, right? Screen time children. While I wait for a question, if I see a question pop up, I'll talk.
Matt, that is a great one. I know a lot of parents feel really, really strongly about that. I am a parent. I love technology, but that doesn't mean it's a free-for-all. To me, it comes down to how, if we're talking about in the classroom or at home, doesn't matter, either way, it really comes down to kind of how they're engaged with the screen time. I think that's the most important part to me, because my daughter, she's 11, and if she's sitting on YouTube, I don't want that. But I to be honest, I'd personally rather her do it playing a game than on YouTube, just because in my mind I think that's more interactive. But I know a lot of people that friends of mine and that don't let their children use technology outside of school at all, and I think that's okay of a choice too, especially depending on their age. If they're in elementary school, maybe they've already had enough screen time at school. But I will say that at a school, our perspective on screen time has evolved, and probably like the rest of the world, it has. We don't want our students mindlessly on iPads, but we recognize that in a lot of ways, the iPad has become their notebook. It has become their library book, their research tool. And so as long as it's being used very purposefully, we don't have a firm limit on it. But we at the same time, we recognize that we want to make sure that the students are engaged with a diversity of activities, sometimes kinesthetic activities, and oftentimes we want them, or most of the time, we want them working with other students. And sometimes technology can facilitate that collaboration, but also it can be a barrier or a distraction, just as us as adults have maybe been distracted by technology. If you're a parent, you probably even had your son or daughter get annoyed with you because they're trying to tell you something and you won't put down the phone.
I've got some wonderful questions coming in, matey. So that's a good perspective, and what I love about that is, and what I can assure parents is, teachers are incredibly thoughtful about everything we do at school, and the consideration around screen time at school even is something that's debated and healthily debated, like you've said before, and always look at the best outcome. I've got some quite nice questions here. I've got one from Sharon, so thank you, Sharon. She said here, is Freckle only for the younger years, or is there equivalent for the secondary school? That's an interesting question. I'd like to know that myself. That's good. Yeah,
that's a great question. The Freckle platform itself has materials and curriculum all the way up through secondary in maths, reading, and a bunch of language things. The language ones are particularly interesting for helping students with their reading comprehension. And I don't want to say it's for test preparation, but it certainly doesn't hurt that they get a lot of practice then reading through texts and analyzing texts and answering multiple choice questions that ask them really to carefully analyze texts. So right now, as of today, we're using it up to year 5 with a few trial classes in the lower part of secondary, and we're looking to scale that up. That said, in secondary, we have a whole basket full of other tools that are used in different departments that, and some of those tools do some of these same things where they take the students a bit on a pathway, but we don't have, there's not a single one platform. As you can imagine, if your student is a biology student, in biology, there's going to be some special one-off things that we've purchased just for the biology department.
Yeah, that's very true, and I think for the parents out there that you were still exploring the full potential of Freckle, and as we see it roll out, we'll get them. I know there's a beautiful continuity going on now between secondary and elementary around our maths, just ensuring that continuity between the two sub-schools, which is the beautiful thing about being an all-through school, is that we have great relationships with the crossovers between the sub-schools. I've got some other lovely questions which I'd love to get on to make sure that I answer here. Jennifer's asking, what I'm still confused about, do we have age settings for our platforms for Google and YouTube? Can you,
yeah, absolutely.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, if you have a regular Google account, like you would have your personal account at home, and you made one for your child, for example, my daughter, she has a regular old-fashioned Gmail account, but I have a restriction. I've set the little button that sets restrictions so she can't change things on it. If you're not sure how to do that, you can just parent restrictions. It's easy to set up. But at school, all of those accounts are managed by what's called Google Apps for Education, and it has a control panel. And just by default, as it's an education thing, it's somewhat locked down, and we can make some more fine-grained decisions. So even if they're not at school and they're signed in with that account, there's still going to be some limits. For example, YouTube videos have to be approved for viewing and things like that. So there are a bunch of kind of safety nets, and these special Google accounts that are for education are provisioned from Google without some of the same advertising kind of hook-ins that you might normally associate with Google.
I think that's a really important one. At school too, we control our own Wi-Fi network. Controlling our own Wi-Fi network gives us a greater control. For parents, I can't encourage them enough to take control of the children's devices. Funnily, I often joke with children. They say it's my laptop, and I always joke with them, I don't think you paid for it. So even as a teacher, I used to say that to them. It's not yours, it's your parents. So feel free to take control. I've got a question here. I think we've probably dealt with. Jennifer's asking. She said, obviously, do children get typing lessons? Do you go down that road? What's your thoughts around that? Using a keyboard quite a bit. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, great question. It's a great debate, and it's not a completely settled debate. Back in maybe almost 10, 12 years ago, or right when iPads came out. When iPads came out, there was a lot of consternation that students could not possibly learn to type on that little keyboard. So I did a research thing. I thought, well, I don't know if they can or not. Let's see. So I gave a little bit of practice for some students on the iPad keyboard, gave them a few tips, and then we did some typing testing on the regular keyboard, and then on that, and the results showed that students really could learn very quickly, and some of our biases against typing on this kind of keyboard stem from the fact that we didn't grow up with it, so we didn't really develop that same kind of skill. It is a bit different typing on an iPad also because your fingers are so close to seeing the text. You can look, you can cheat, right? Whereas the old-fashioned typewriters, you really couldn't see your fingers and the text at the same time. So there are differences, definitely. But students can learn to be touch typists on an iPad. But whether it's a computer or an iPad, it is a question of, do we need to teach it explicitly? My view is this. My view is that the reason I didn't learn how to type when I was in high school, even though I had to take typing, was because I didn't type very much. It'd be like having one unit of study in a PE class doing some weird exotic sport, but you can learn it. And I had typing, a few times a week for half an hour, and But I didn't type outside of that because I'm old and we didn't use computers, and I only had to borrow my mom's typewriter a few times a term to type up some final paper.
Yeah.
So I didn't really learn because of that. Our students, on the other hand, spend so much time typing that what we need, probably, in my opinion, is to scaffold their usage to try to get them to use some good technique. And then the practicing part will take care of itself because they will be spending so much time. And by what I mean by good technique is, by default, a lot of students, especially on an iPad, might pick up the iPad and hold it with one hand and type like this. When if they simply set it down, landscape on the table, maybe prop it up a little bit, maybe not, and just set their fingers on it just like they would a typical typewriter, they go, oh, I really can do this. 30 seconds later, they're kind of touch typing. It's fascinating to see. And if you can keep them on that, then there are a lot of kids that can type quite quickly, 40, 50, 60 words a minute in elementary school. And so hopefully that transfers well into secondary. But I agree that there are some people that have not developed the right habits. And so we should shape that, whether it's from the school or from home, to really encourage them to get their fingers down on those home keys. But other than that, I think the practicing part will take care of itself.
I like that. I've thought about that just recently, actually, Jennifer. So I agree. I don't type well as an adult. I'm dreadful, and I wish I had now. I perhaps even think about doing that myself, is getting on and learning that, making that skill. And teachers wouldn't have to spend a lot of time. I'm sure there's some nice programs out there that help a bit, and the kids make it quite fun, that we could do it incidentally. So that's an interesting conversation point. Well, I'll watch that space a little bit in the future. So thank you very much for that, Jennifer. I've just got another question here. It'll be our last question before we close off for the evening. Sarah's just asked, how can I best support my children with their digital learning? Gosh, I'm not sure we've got quite enough time for that, but you give me a minute or two.
Okay, super, great question. Well, I'm going to start with, if you're a parent at AIS, you've probably heard us talking about the Common Sense Media, and that's our digital citizenship program. So one of the things that you can do is try to make sure you engage with that. Occasionally in elementary school, they'll get a few homework assignments related to a lesson that they did in class. Yes. And in secondary, we've just been sending out new media agreements for students to sign, and in some year levels for the parents to interact with and I think the key to it is, the starting key is that you are proactive about your communication with the child, and that you come to accept that technology is a powerful, positive force for your child. And there may be arguments about how much they use it, and you might have those kind of disputes and some friction, but that you accept and you make it very verbal to them that you think that their use of technology is powerful and good, and that you're on the same team, and it's a partnership. I think that's step one. And step two is when they're interested in something that is developing their skills, go for it. And so, like my daughter, I really wanted her to start to use her technology in a little bit more of an interesting way. So I bought her one of those Sphero robots so that she could roll it around on the ground and program it. And the next thing you know, she wanted to buy the next thing. And yeah, I bought it for her. But letting them kind of set the direction of some of their interests, if you can latch on to that, something that's not them watching YouTube and not just gaming, although gaming is not all bad, maybe you can get them interested in how do they build their own game. And so you get excited, sit with them, let them show you what they're doing.
I think that's a lovely way to wrap up, actually, Brady. And like you said, the digital citizenship is wonderful. Our school runs really good programs. Be involved, like I said, talk to them, have those discussions. And I think that's always the key for any relationship between parents and teachers. And like we've wonderfully just said, now because of the digital age we're in, the parents are so much more involved in the teachers, the school, the actual learning, right? And I always say that to them: look at the actual learning, right? What's actually going on. So listen, thank you very much, Brady. I'm really, that's been an absolute blast listening to you. You're so passionate, so knowledgeable. The school is very lucky to have you on board and working. So thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you. It was a real pleasure, Matt. Thank you.
And thank you very much to our guests for joining us. I hope that you enjoyed that. Remember that we will have recorded this and we'll put it around. Please feel free to share with any of your family and friends in now and in the future. But thank you all for attending, and that will be the end of our session for today. So we look forward to our next session. So look out for that being advertised. The topic is up for debate at the moment, but I can tell you it will be in the early years. So in the early years education will be our first section on the early years. Our actual topic is yet to come, but watch out for that being advertised. Enjoy your evening, ladies and gentlemen. Bye from us. Take care.